It's the greatest unsolved mystery of the ancient world. Just who built the pyramids? Who were the first Egyptians? Were they aliens or visitors from the lost city of Atlantis? The Egypt detectives are on the case.
Ancient Egypt has inspired awe for thousands of years, and its monuments, like the Great Pyramid, are among the wonders of the world.
Ancient Egypt is a land rich in mystery and intrigue. But how did it all start? Egypt detectives Dominic Montserrat and Miriam Cook want to know. They're hot on a very cold trail. Can a mystery thousands of years old be cracked? Can they track down the first Egyptian builders? Or have history, time, and sand covered the answers forever? There's some pretty strange ideas about the first Egyptians. 200 years ago, Western researchers who came here couldn't believe the Egyptians they saw could have built the spectacular culture that once thrived here. They didn't seem sophisticated enough to have built the incredible tombs and fabulous wealth that's such a rich part of Egyptian history. The foreign visitors decided that the culture must have come from somewhere else, that essentially ancient Egypt was created by people other than Egyptians. It's an idea that's never gone away, and some of the theories are pretty fantastic. Perhaps aliens were responsible, maybe visitors from fabled Atlantis. Dr. Zahi Hawass is the man in charge of Egypt's ancient sites, and this speculation bugs him.
It's insulting to the mind of the people who talks about this, because it means that no human being can build a pyramid, and this is why it makes them to be small and makes them to be not really smart, because they never look at the Egyptian civilization. They never really study that.
Hawass is convinced Egyptians created the glory of ancient Egypt. But how can our detectives be sure? How can they solve a case thousands of years old? The most important clues are the artifacts that have been left behind. Fragments of the past will have to talk for the people who are long dead and buried.
They made masks to preserve their appearance. They used mummification to keep their bodies intact. And they constructed symbolic boats in which they would travel eternally through the heavens like the gods.
Sunboats, masks, mummies. They can't speak, but they might help our detectives solve this ancient mystery. If they can be traced through the past, our detectives might learn where they came from. To cover more ground, the detectives decide to split up. There are too many clues to track down together.
How are we going to solve this puzzle of the first Egyptians?
Well, we have to look at archaeological evidence. There's some very early sites in the Nile Valley, and these must give us some important clues.
I'd like to do something different. There are some very early texts in one of the first pyramids. They might prove just as revealing as the archaeology.
Miriam begins by searching for literature about the oldest dig sites in the Nile Valley. Dominic heads to Saqqara, once a graveyard for the rich and famous. Here, more than 4,000 years ago, generations of pharaohs were buried. Dominic thinks there may be vital clues in this eerie place. Inside the burial chamber of the pharaoh Unas, Dominic finds mysterious inscriptions. He believes that these could provide evidence about the origins of Egyptian civilization. Miriam follows later to see what he's discovered.
Dominic, I'm here.
Mind your head.
Hey. absolutely incredible.
Isn't it stunning?
But it looks almost pristine.
Yeah, it's been closed to the public for 10 years to preserve it properly.
These are the so-called pyramid texts. They're a collection of sacred spells that protect the dead pharaoh as he journeys into the afterlife. They're written in a form of ancient Egyptian that was probably much older than the pyramids. They could be a 4,000-year-old smoking gun. Dominic finds something remarkable. After close study, he discovers a reference to one of the most powerful symbols of ancient Egypt, sunboats.
One thing you see again and again are these solar boats, like here, in which the dead king travels in order to be reborn. And during that journey, he's very vulnerable to attack from hostile animals like scorpions and snakes, even malicious donkeys.
These boats could be a vital clue about who the first Egyptians were. These carvings are older than the pyramids, so the people who wrote them are closely related to the first Egyptians. The boats are taking our detectives back in time. Another clue here tells the detectives where their investigation should go next.
Two places that come up again and again are these twin cities, Nekhen and Nekheb. The Egyptians seem to have regarded them as incredibly ancient places, almost like the centres of their own origin.
And do we know where these places were or where they are? Because it sounds like a really good lead.
Yeah, well, Nekheb is the modern El Kab.
Miriam's detective work confirms that El Kab is an important dig site. It's more than 700 kilometers south of Cairo, in the arid eastern desert. Venturing into that hostile land has to be the next step in tracking down the past. Miriam arranges to get there with Dirk Hoyji, who's made some remarkable discoveries in El Kab. It's rock art that predates the first pyramids by almost 1,000 years. Can these clues reveal the identity of the first Egyptians? Aliens, visitors from Atlantis. There are strange ideas about the origins of ancient Egypt. Egypt detective Miriam Cook searches for clues in the deserts far from Cairo. She's joined here by maverick researcher Dirk Hoyji. Instead of studying grand temples and pyramids, he's trying to understand faded images scratched on sandstone in a place called El Kab. After years of research, he's only just published his work.
Is this the most impressive rock art gallery in El Kab?
Yes, it is by far.
This is called the Rock of the Vultures. It's essentially an ancient art gallery. These carvings could hold vital clues about the past.
Well, it's beautiful.
Did the artists responsible go on to build the glories of ancient Egypt? Some of these images do seem familiar. Miriam is hot on the trail of the very first Egyptians.
Look, Miriam, this is one of the most important compositions in the rock art of El Kab. So what you have here is a square-shaped boat associated with a lot of animals, and these are mainly donkeys. You see, there's another huge boat here, and there are two representations here of donkeys. And as you can see, they are shown with a stroke, sort of a spear in their back. Now, why is this? Donkeys were considered malicious beings, and they definitely had a function in rock art. But one way or another, they had to be rendered armless. So they represented them with a spear in their back.
These are remarkable clues. Boats and donkeys, just like these, have been discovered in the pyramids. The investigation is heating up. Miriam is getting closer to the origins of ancient Egypt.
Oh, I can see the boat.
Or is she? It's intriguing, but there's a problem with this clue. When exactly were these carvings made? This rock is hard to date, but Dirk has found a way to do it by looking in pots, like these.
This type of boat with these two cabins, these sickle-shaped boats, are typical for the period between about 3,500 and 3,200 BC. because they are also a very typical, very common motif on the pottery from that period.
These pots, with similar images of sunboats, can be dated using current technology. They indeed turn out to be about 1,000 years older than the pyramids. So an obsession with the sun stretched deep into the desert. Could the people of El Kab be the first Egyptians? Recently, Dirk has been able to push the dating of this clue back even further. Hidden beneath the boats are older images of giraffes, their long necks stretched toward the sun. Could they be proof of an even earlier form of sun worship? Proof that ancient Egypt began here?
The giraffes are clearly older than that, and my hunch is that they date from between 4,000 and 3,500 BC.
Why were boats replacing giraffes?
Climate became completely unfavorable for these large animals, giraffe, elephants, etc. So they became increasingly scarce in the landscape, and people had no longer confidence in them. So they needed a new symbol, a new device to act as a bearer of the sun. And they chose the boat, because the boat was enormously important in their lives. The power of one image, of the older image, was transferred upon the newer image.
It all makes sense. El Kab is on the edge of the desert, but it's also next to the Nile. Boats were an obvious choice to carry the sun. Something which would later become an important symbol in ancient Egypt had its roots here. The investigation is closing in. The sunboat can now be pushed back thousands of years in history. Whoever drew the art at El Kab used the same symbols found in early pyramids. Is it a coincidence? The trail has led not to Atlantis, but to El Kab. It's no secret that sunboats are a vital part of ancient Egyptian culture. Next to the Great Pyramid, digs have uncovered this, a sunboat almost 50 meters long. It was meant to take a pharaoh's soul into the afterlife. Boats like this were buried next to many Egyptian pyramids. And they look just like the sickle-shaped boats of El Kab. Has the case been solved? Maybe, but maybe not. The problem is there's almost nothing known about exactly who made the rock art at El Kab. Perhaps they were made by invaders from outside Egypt who were passing through. To finish the case, the Egypt detectives face another puzzle. How can they find artists who have been dead for more than 3,000 years? They're silent witnesses, but a clue to their identity might be just a short boat ride across the Nile. Egypt detectives Dominic Montserrat and Miriam Cook are trying to crack a 3,000-year-old mystery. Did the glories of ancient Egypt have their roots in Egypt, or did they come from somewhere else? Maybe from space, from Atlantis. Strange ideas have been around for years. The key clue could be simple sunboats. An important symbol in ancient Egypt, the first known drawings of these boats were found in El Kab. Whoever made them could be the first Egyptians. But how do you talk to someone who's been dead for thousands of years?
How are you doing?
Hey, not too bad.
How'd you get on as El Kab?
It was fantastic. Dirk showed me some incredible rock art. It's the very same images that we saw in the pyramid text. There's boats with solar significance, there's those malicious donkeys that we saw before. It's the same ideas, but it's just a very early stage.
So how far back are we talking?
Oh, it's about 6,000 years ago.
Blimey. That's really pushing back the frontiers of settlement in the valley, isn't it?
Yeah, but the problem is that we don't have the archaeology to go with it. So we know very little about the people that created it. I was thinking about that other place that's mentioned in the pyramid text, the twin town of El Kab.
That's an amazing site.
The trail is leading to Hierakonpolis, across the river from El Kab. Here, the mystery is about to deepen. The clues aren't carvings of sunboats or giraffes, but something altogether different. Something astonishing. Digs here have made groundbreaking discoveries. Finds that are as old as those across the river at El Kab. finds that may point to the artists behind the work. Renee Friedman is in charge of the site. She's one of a small handful of people who's trying to learn who the first Egyptians really were. What could be uncovered about the people behind the glories of ancient Egypt? Did the pyramids, mummies, and golden idols we've come to know as Egypt get their start here? The Egypt detectives meet Renee Friedman. She's found clues that may help solve their case once and for all. Artifacts that might have been models for those found later in the Great Pyramids. The most amazing find is one of the earliest examples ever found of a burial mask. What secrets can this mask reveal? Where did the glories of ancient Egypt come from? Solving that mystery has led the Egypt detectives to the shores of the Nile and to Renee Friedman. She has an astonishing clue: this ancient burial mask.
This is made out of fired clay, and, you know, it fits, it works. It was tied behind the ears. There's little holes, and there's even a little divot for the chin, so it would fit very comfortably on the face.
So is this the ancestor of the Mask of Tutankhamun?
Absolutely, absolutely. We've always wondered where funerary masks get their start, and now we have the answer.
Do you think it had the same kind of symbolism as the later masks?
I would think so. I think this was sort of a shortcut to the afterlife, to already becoming a spirit. As we know from later times, masks had an incredible amount of power simply by being masks. You know, putting them on made you the divinity.
There are a number of burial masks, but that's not all. When you think of ancient Egypt, you think of mummies. Evidence of those too can be found here. Mummies created thousands of years before King Tut.
We have some of the earliest evidence, if not the earliest evidence, for the beginnings of artificial mummification. Here we have a mummified hand, and this dates to about 3600 BC, and you can see the fingers still in there. And the other hand would be placed over it because the people were buried on their sides in a fetal position, preparing for rebirth, with the hands by the head. And these were wrapped in layers and layers of resinated linen, like a paper mache. They'd coat it in linen, and then they'd apply a layer and mold it also around the face, the base of the head, and the hands.
The clues are coming together. It wasn't aliens or an invading army who built the pyramids and mummies of ancient Egypt. Those ideas began here, on the banks of the Nile. But there is still a puzzle. King Tut was both mummified and given a golden mask. At its height, Egyptian culture saw both as essential rites for the dead. But at Hierakonpolis, the burials had either masks or mummies. What was going on? Renee believes this was a society that was doing experiments, a society in the making.
So later there must have been a merging of these burial traditions.
Society had reached a point in time where they had just decided the experimentation was over. Someone decided that this would be the way. And this would be the way they would do it for the next 3,000 years. And I think was as far as mummification is concerned, at about 3,000, society reached critical mass, and that's just the way it was going to be.
It's the final piece of proof. Renee Friedman believes the case is solid. The people of Hierakonpolis were the ancestors of the pyramid builders. Her remarkable finds date to about 3800 BC. That's more than 1,200 years before the Great Pyramid was built.
Can the site take us any further back in time?
Oh yes, we can go much further back than this.
Right, so what have you found in this section of the site then?
Well, this is where we made excavations in 1984. And we started off with a house dating from about 3000 BC, First Dynasty, and we thought that's when this part of the settlement began. But we made excavations below it, and we went a full 4 meters below the water table and never hit sterile soil. There was occupation all the way down. So that's about 6 meters below where we're standing right now.
So the site hasn't been abandoned at all at any
It was
point?
never abandoned. And at the very bottom of these cores, we found some of the earliest evidence for occupation we have here. These are sherds from dating to about 4500 BC.
Wow.
Very distinctive with their rippled texture. So we know exactly when they date to, just by the type of pottery that they are.
So that's 6,500 years of archaeology.
Stratified right here, yes.
So the evidence shows that the origins of Egyptian culture started right here in the Nile Valley.
Absolutely. There was certainly habitation from about 5000 BC, if not earlier. It's just that we have trouble finding the evidence because it's so deeply buried. But there's no question that it was definitely here.
The detectives don't have to look any further. The trail stops here. A full 2,000 years before the incredible pyramids were built at Giza, the people of the Nile Valley were building a culture. They invented the mummy, funeral masks, and the sunboats that carried the pharaohs from this world into the afterlife. Their mysterious case has been solved. The origins of ancient Egypt have been found. These ancestors of the famous Egyptians we've come to know have been largely forgotten by history. But they didn't need any help from foreign countries or more exotic visitors. The magnificent culture that later flourished elsewhere began here. Another case solved by the Egypt detectives.